Picture this. A decorated police officer, drunk on power and authority, makes the biggest mistake of his career. He thinks he's untouchable, protected by his badge and years of intimidating civilians. But when he decides to mess with the wrong person on a quiet Tuesday evening in downtown Los Angeles, his world is about to crumble in ways he never imagined. What starts as routine harassment quickly spirals into a nightmare that will haunt him forever. This isn't just another story about justice. It's about what happens when someone who spent years breaking others finally meets their match. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Melrose Avenue as Ronda Rousey pedaled her mountain bike through the bustling streets of West Hollywood. She'd traded her fighting gloves for cycling gear, finding peace in the rhythm of her wheels against the asphalt. After years of brutal training camps and championship fights, these quiet rides had become her sanctuary, a place where she could think, breathe, and remember who she was beyond the octagon. Traffic moved sluggishly through the intersection ahead, and Ronda slowed her pace, her keen eyes scanning the familiar urban landscape. Street vendors called out their wares, tourists snapped photos of colorful murals, and the distant hum of the city created a soundtrack she'd grown to love. This was her neighborhood now, far from the small-town Ohio roots where her journey began. Officer Marcus Brennan sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, his thick fingers drumming impatiently against the steering wheel. 23 years on the force had hardened him into something bitter and cynical. His once idealistic view of law enforcement had been replaced by a growing sense of entitlement and barely contained rage. The divorce papers sitting on his passenger seat served as a constant reminder of how his life was falling apart. And today, like most days lately, he was looking for someone to take it out on. Brennan's cold blue eyes locked onto the cyclist ahead. Something about her confident posture, the way she commanded space on the road, irritated him immediately. In his twisted worldview, civilians were meant to be submissive, grateful for his protection. This woman looked like she didn't need protecting from anyone. Perfect, he muttered under his breath, flipping on his lights. Ronda heard the sirens and instinctively moved toward the curb, assuming the officer needed to pass. She'd always respected law enforcement. Her stepfather had been a cop, and she understood the dangers they faced daily. But as she glanced in her small handlebar mirror, she realized the patrol car was following her, not trying to get around. Brennan pulled up alongside her and rolled down his window. "Pull over," he barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Ronda came to a stop near a small coffee shop, her heart rate barely elevated from the ride. She dismounted gracefully, her athletic frame moving with the fluid precision that had made her a champion. Several pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing tension in the air. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone respectful but confident. Years of media training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, and she could sense this situation required careful navigation. Brennan stepped out of his car, his imposing 6'2" frame casting a shadow over her. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, but there was something unsettling in his demeanor, a barely controlled aggression that made nearby civilians unconsciously step back. "You were riding recklessly," he lied smoothly, pulling out his citation book. "Endangering pedestrians, ignoring traffic signals." Each word was delivered with practiced authority, the kind of fabricated charges he'd used countless times to assert dominance over people who'd done nothing wrong. Ronda's jaw tightened slightly. She'd been riding these streets for months, always following traffic laws, always respectful of pedestrians. "Officer, I was following all traffic regulations. I stopped at every light, signaled my turns, and maintained proper distance from pedestrians." "Are you arguing with me?" Brennan's voice rose, drawing more attention from passers-by. A few people began recording with their phones, sensing something was wrong. "I'm telling you what I saw, and what I saw was reckless endangerment." The afternoon crowd began to gather, office workers heading home, students from the nearby art school, local shop owners stepping outside to see what was happening. Ronda could feel their eyes on her, could sense their growing unease as they witnessed what appeared to be an abuse of power. "I'm not arguing, officer. I'm simply stating the facts," Ronda replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "I have a right to use these roads safely and legally, which is exactly what I was doing." Something in her tone, the lack of fear, The quiet confidence sent Brennan over the edge. In his mind, this woman was challenging his authority, questioning his version of events. Years of unchecked power had convinced him that his word was law, that civilians existed solely to comply with his demands. "Step away from the bike," he ordered, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. "You're being detained for questioning." Ronda remained calm, but her fighter's instincts were beginning to surface. She'd faced down opponents who wanted to hurt her, had stared into the eyes of women who'd trained their entire lives to defeat her. This officer's intimidation tactics felt familiar, like a bully trying to establish dominance through fear. "On what grounds am I being detained?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough steel to let him know she wouldn't be easily intimidated. "I haven't committed any crime, and you haven't articulated any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity." The crowd was growing larger now, phones held high, recording every word. Brennan could feel their judgment, their skepticism about his actions. It only fueled his anger further. In his twisted logic, these civilians were witnessing his authority being challenged, and that was unacceptable. "Don't lecture me about the law," he snarled, stepping closer to her. "I am the law here." That's when he made his fatal mistake. In a moment of pure rage and entitlement, Brennan reached out and shoved Ronda hard, sending her stumbling backward away from her bike. The crowd gasped collectively, several people shouting in protest. What they'd witnessed was clear assault, captured on multiple cameras, with no justification whatsoever. But Brennan had no idea who he'd just put his hands on. As Ronda regained her balance, something shifted in her demeanor. The respectful civilian disappeared, replaced by someone who'd spent years learning how to handle people who wanted to hurt her. Her stance widened slightly, her center of gravity lowered, and her eyes took on a focus that would have been familiar to anyone who'd watched her compete. "Officer," she said quietly, her voice now carrying an edge that made several onlookers step back. "You just made a very serious mistake." Brennan, still riding high on his own perceived authority, completely missed the warning signs. "What are you going to do about it?" he sneered, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for resisting arrest and assaulting an officer." The irony of arresting someone for assaulting an officer immediately after he'd assaulted her wasn't lost on the crowd. Angry murmurs rippled through the gathering and someone shouted, "We saw what happened. You pushed her first." But Brennan was beyond reason now. 23 years of unchecked power, a failing marriage, and a growing sense that the world owed him something had culminated in this moment. He lunged forward to grab Ronda's arm, intending to force her to the ground and cuff her. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and news outlets worldwide. Ronda's muscle memory kicked in. Years of training, thousands of hours perfecting techniques designed to neutralize aggressive opponents. As Brennan reached for her, she moved with lightning speed, using his own momentum against him. The hip toss was textbook perfect. Brennan found himself airborne for a brief, terrifying moment before crashing hard onto the concrete sidewalk. The impact drove the wind from his lungs and sent his radio skittering across the pavement. For the first time in decades, Marcus Brennan found himself looking up at someone instead of down. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their phones capturing every second of what would soon become viral footage. But Ronda wasn't celebrating. She stood over the fallen officer, her expression serious and controlled. "I am Ronda Rousey," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every phone recording the scene. "Former UFC bantamweight champion, Olympic bronze medalist in judo, and someone who has spent her entire life learning how to defend herself against people who want to hurt me. You just committed assault and battery against a civilian, and it's all been recorded by dozens of witnesses." Brennan struggled to catch his breath, his mind reeling from both the physical impact and the sudden realization of who he'd just attacked. The name hit him like a second blow to the chest. Ronda Rousey, one of the most famous fighters in the world, someone with millions of fans and a platform that could destroy his career with a single social media post. You can't," he wheezed, trying to regain some semblance of authority even while lying flat on his back. "I can, and I did," Ronda replied calmly. "You initiated physical contact without justification, and I defended myself using reasonable force. Every person here witnessed your assault, and every phone here recorded it. You're not dealing with someone who's going to be intimidated by your badge or your threats. As Brennan slowly got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage, he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The crowd was hostile now, clearly on Ronda's side. His radio was broken, his authority shattered, and his actions captured in high definition from multiple angles. But the worst part was yet to come. As he looked into Ronda's eyes, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Not anger or fear, but the cold calculation of someone who knew exactly how to destroy him. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a businesswoman, a media personality, someone with connections throughout the entertainment industry and beyond. "Here's what's going to happen," Ronda said quietly, stepping closer so only he could hear. "You're going to get back in your car and drive away. You're going to think very carefully about whether you want this video to go viral with your name attached to it. And you're going to remember that there are consequences for people who abuse their power." The crowd began chanting her name, their phones still recording, still broadcasting live to social media platforms around the world. Brennan could see his career, his pension, his entire future crumbling before his eyes. But his pride, his ego, wouldn't let him simply walk away. If you're enjoying this incredible story of justice and want to see how this confrontation unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us what you think should happen to Officer Brennan. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing content like this. And don't forget to smash that like button to help this story reach even more people who need to see what real accountability looks like. The tension in the air was electric as Brennan stood there, his uniform disheveled, his authority in tatters. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, all of them witnesses to his assault on an innocent civilian. Their phones continued recording, capturing every moment of his humiliation. But instead of accepting defeat and walking away, Brennan's pride and years of unchecked power drove him to make an even worse decision. "This isn't over," he hissed at Ronda, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I've got friends in this department, connections you can't imagine. I'll make your life hell." Ronda's expression didn't change, but several people in the crowd heard his threat and began shouting in outrage. "Did you hear that?" someone yelled. "He's threatening her," another voice called out. "This is exactly why people don't trust cops anymore." What Brennan didn't realize was that among the crowd stood Detective Sarah Chen, an off-duty internal affairs investigator who'd been grabbing coffee when the commotion started. She'd watched the entire encounter unfold, had seen Brennan's unprovoked assault, and was now listening to him make threats against a civilian. Her own phone was recording, and she was already mentally composing the report that would end his career. "Officer Brennan," Detective Chen called out, stepping forward and showing her badge. "I'm Detective Chen, Internal Affairs. I need you to step away from Ms. Rousey immediately." Brennan's face went white as he recognized Chen. Internal Affairs was every corrupt cop's nightmare. They were the ones who investigated police misconduct, the ones who could strip away badges and pensions. Seeing Chen here, having witnessed everything, was like watching his worst fears materialize. "Detective Chen, this is just a misunderstanding," Brennan stammered, his aggressive demeanor evaporating instantly. "This civilian was being uncooperative, and I was just trying to maintain order." "I saw you assault Ms. Rousey without provocation," Chen replied coldly. "I heard you make threats against her, and I've got it all recorded, just like everyone else here." She gestured to the crowd, their phones still capturing every word. Ronda watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. She'd dealt with bullies her entire life, in school, in the gym, in the media. They all followed the same pattern. They were tough when they thought they had power, but crumbled the moment they faced real consequences. "Officer Brennan," Ronda said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. "You wanted to know who you were messing with. Let me tell you exactly who I am. I'm someone with 12 million followers on social media. I'm someone who's been on every major talk show, who has direct lines to reporters at every major news network. I'm someone who's spent years speaking out against bullies and people who abuse their power." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But more importantly, I'm someone who was raised to stand up for what's right. My stepfather was a police officer, a good one who served his community with honor and integrity. He taught me to respect law enforcement, But he also taught me that respect has to be earned. You haven't earned anyone's respect today." The crowd murmured their agreement, and several people called out their support for Ronda. Brennan looked around desperately, realizing that every face in the crowd was hostile, that every phone was still recording, that his actions were probably already spreading across the internet. Detective Chen stepped closer to Brennan. "You're going to return to the station immediately. You're suspended pending a full investigation. Your weapon and badge will be confiscated, and you'll be placed on administrative leave. This is a direct order." "You can't do this to me," Brennan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've got 23 years on the force. I've got rights." "You had rights," Chen corrected him. "You forfeited them the moment you decided to assault a civilian. The moment you decided that your badge gave you the right to put your hands on someone who was doing nothing wrong." Ronda retrieved her bike, checking it for damage. The crowd began to disperse slightly, but many people lingered, still recording, still hoping to capture more of this unprecedented scene. It wasn't every day that someone witnessed a corrupt cop getting his comeuppance in real time. "Ms. Rousey," Detective Chen approached her, "I'll need you to file a formal complaint. What happened here today was completely unacceptable, and I want to make sure Officer Brennan faces the full consequences of his actions." "Absolutely," Ronda replied. "I've dealt with enough bullies in my life to know that they only stop when they face real consequences. This man has probably been doing this to people for years, people who didn't have the training to defend themselves, people who didn't have the platform to fight back." As she spoke, Ronda's phone began buzzing with notifications. The videos were already going viral, shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. News outlets were picking up the story, and her publicist was calling to discuss media strategy. But for Ronda, this wasn't about publicity or fame. It was about justice. Brennan stood there, watching his world collapse in real time. His phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, his supervisor, his union representative. The videos had already been picked up by major news networks, and his name was trending on social media, alongside hashtags like police accountability and justice served. But the worst call came from his ex-wife, Marcus. Her voice was cold and disgusted. "Our daughter just saw the video of you attacking that woman. She's crying, asking me why her daddy would hurt someone. How am I supposed to explain this to her?" That hit harder than Ronda's hip toss. Brennan had always told himself that his aggressive tactics were justified, that he was one of the good guys protecting society from criminals. But seeing himself through his daughter's eyes, watching footage of himself bullying and assaulting an innocent woman, shattered that delusion completely. The crowd finally began to thin out, but the damage was done. Multiple news vans were already arriving, drawn by the viral videos and the celebrity involvement. Reporters were setting up cameras, preparing to broadcast the story to millions of viewers worldwide. Ronda gave her statement to Detective Chen, providing a clear, detailed account of everything that had happened. Her years of media training served her well. She was articulate, credible, and compelling. When the reporters approached her for interviews, she was ready. "This isn't about me," she told the cameras. "This is about accountability. This is about making sure that people in positions of power can't abuse that power without consequences." Officer Brennan thought his badge made him untouchable, but no one is above the law. The story exploded across social media and traditional news outlets. Within hours, Ronda V's Bad Cop was trending worldwide. The video had been viewed millions of times, shared by celebrities, politicians, and activists. Police departments across the country were forced to address questions about officer conduct and accountability. But for Marcus Brennan, the nightmare was just beginning. As he sat in his empty apartment that night, suspended from duty and facing potential criminal charges, he realized that his moment of rage had cost him everything. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his relationship with his daughter potentially ruined forever. The woman he'd thought he could intimidate and assault with impunity had turned out to be someone with the skills to defend herself and the platform to ensure justice was served. His 23 years of unchecked power had come to an end in a matter of minutes, all because he'd chosen to mess with the wrong person on the wrong day. As the story continued to spread, generating millions of views and sparking nationwide conversations about police accountability, One thing became crystal clear. Sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected forms. And sometimes, the people who think they're untouchable discover just how wrong they can be. This incredible story of justice and accountability is far from over. If you want to see what happens next to Officer Brennan and how this viral moment changes everything, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. You won't want to miss the shocking conclusion. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on this confrontation, and don't forget to hit that like button to help this story reach even more people who need to see what real justice looks like. Your support helps us bring you more amazing content like this, so smash that subscribe button and let's continue this journey together. The next morning brought a media firestorm that neither Ronda nor Brennan could have anticipated. The video had been viewed over 20 million times across all platforms, and every major news network was running the story as their lead. But what started as a simple case of police misconduct was about to reveal something much darker and more systematic. Detective Chen arrived at the Internal Affairs office at 6 a.m., 2 hours before her usual start time. The Brennan case had exploded overnight, and she knew the department would be under intense scrutiny. As she reviewed the preliminary background check on Officer Brennan, disturbing patterns began to emerge. "Captain Rodriguez," she called to her supervisor. "You need to see this." Captain Rodriguez, a 30-year veteran with an impeccable reputation, looked over the files Chen had spread across her desk. What he saw made his stomach turn. Over the past 5 years, there had been 17 complaints filed against Brennan. Excessive force, harassment, intimidation tactics. All of them had been quietly buried or dismissed due to insufficient evidence. "How did this slip through the cracks?" Rodriguez asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Lieutenant Morrison was handling most of these cases," Chen replied carefully. Morrison was Brennan's longtime friend and golf partner, someone who'd been protecting him for years. Every complaint was either dismissed or resulted in minor disciplinary action. Meanwhile, across town, Ronda was dealing with her own media circus. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke, with interview requests from every major network and newspaper. But she was also receiving something else, messages from other victims. "Ms. Rousey," read one email, "I saw your video and I had to reach out. Officer Brennan did the same thing to me 2 years ago. He pulled me over for no reason, got aggressive when I asked why, and when I tried to file a complaint, nothing happened. Thank you for standing up to him." The messages kept coming, dozens of them, all telling similar stories. Brennan had been terrorizing civilians for years, targeting people he thought couldn't fight back. Young women, elderly citizens, immigrants who were afraid to complain. All of them had fallen victim to his abuse of power. Ronda forwarded every message to Detective Chen, building a case that went far beyond their single encounter. This wasn't just about one bad cop having a bad day. This was about systematic abuse that had been covered up for years. At the police station, Brennan sat in an interrogation room, his union lawyer beside him. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named David Walsh, had been trying to minimize the damage, but the evidence was overwhelming. "Marcus, you need to understand the gravity of this situation," Walsh said quietly. "The video is everywhere. The department is under massive pressure to act. And now Internal Affairs is reopening every complaint that was ever filed against you." Brennan's hands shook as he reached for his coffee. He'd barely slept, haunted by the image of himself lying on the concrete while Ronda Rousey stood over him. But worse than the physical humiliation was the growing realization of what he'd become. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. She was so confident, so sure of herself. It reminded me of my ex-wife, the way she used to challenge me. I lost control." "That's exactly what you cannot say in front of Internal Affairs," Walsh warned him. "You're admitting to assault motivated by personal issues. That's career suicide." But Brennan was beyond caring about his career. The messages on his phone from his daughter had stopped completely. His ex-wife had sent a single text, "Don't contact us again until you get help." His own mother had called, crying, asking how she'd raised a son who would attack an innocent woman. Detective Chen's investigation was moving quickly. She'd interviewed 6 of Brennan's previous victims, and their stories painted a picture of a man who'd been spiraling out of control for years. The pattern was always the same: minor traffic stops that escalated into confrontations. aggressive behavior toward anyone who questioned his authority, and a complete lack of accountability. "Captain," Chen reported, "we've got enough evidence to recommend criminal charges. Assault and battery, abuse of power under color of authority, and potentially civil rights violations. The FBI is interested in taking a look at this." The FBI involvement sent shockwaves through the department. What had started as a viral video was now a federal investigation into police corruption and civil rights violations. Other officers who'd worked with Brennan were being questioned, and the entire department was under scrutiny. Ronda, meanwhile, was using her platform to amplify the voices of Brennan's other victims. She'd organized a press conference where several of them agreed to speak publicly for the first time. The stories they told were heartbreaking. Elderly citizens terrorized during routine traffic stops, young mothers humiliated in front of their children, immigrants too afraid to seek help because of their encounters with Brennan. "This isn't about revenge," Ronda told the packed room of reporters. "This is about making sure that what happened to these people never happens again." Officer Brennan was enabled by a system that protected him instead of protecting the people he was supposed to serve. The press conference was broadcast live across multiple networks, and the impact was immediate. Calls for police reform echoed from City Hall to the state capitol. The mayor announced a comprehensive review of the entire police department, and the police chief was forced to resign in disgrace. But the most powerful moment came when Maria Santos, a single mother who'd been one of Brennan's victims, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice shook as she described how Brennan had pulled her over while she was driving her sick child to the hospital, how he'd screamed at her and threatened to arrest her when she tried to explain the emergency. "My son was having an asthma attack," she said through tears. "I was terrified he was going to die, and this officer made it worse. He didn't care about my child's life, and he only cared about showing me who was in charge. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened. Nothing ever happened." The room was silent except for the clicking of cameras. Ronda reached over and took Maria's hand, offering silent support. The image of the former champion comforting a victim of police abuse became iconic, shared millions of times with captions about solidarity and justice. Back at the police station, Brennan watched the press conference on the break room television. Each victim's story hit him like a physical blow. He remembered Maria Santos, remembered her terrified face as she begged him to let her get her son to the hospital. At the time, he'd felt powerful, in control. Now, seeing the pain he'd caused, he felt nothing but shame. "I need to make this right," he told his lawyer. "Marcus, don't do anything stupid," Walsh warned. "Let me handle the negotiations with the DA. We might be able to work out a plea deal." But Brennan was done hiding behind lawyers and union protection. That afternoon, he walked into Detective Chen's office without his attorney and made a full confession. He admitted to assaulting Ronda Rousey, acknowledged the pattern of abuse toward civilians, and provided details about how complaints against him had been systematically buried. "I want to testify against Lieutenant Morrison," he said quietly. "He's been covering for me for years, and there are other officers involved too. This whole thing is rotten, and it needs to be exposed." Chen was stunned. In her 15 years with internal affairs, she'd never seen a cop voluntarily implicate his fellow officers. But Brennan seemed genuinely broken, genuinely remorseful for what he'd done. "Why now?" she asked. "Why are you willing to talk now?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw myself through my daughter's eyes," he finally said. "She's 8 years old, and she thinks her daddy is a monster. Maybe I am a monster, but I don't want to be one anymore." The confession opened floodgates. Within weeks, the investigation had expanded to include a dozen officers and 3 supervisors. The corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Evidence tampering, false reports, systematic harassment of civilians who filed complaints. The entire department was restructured, with new leadership and comprehensive reforms. Ronda continued to use her platform to advocate for police accountability and victims' rights. She established a foundation to provide legal support for people who'd been abused by law enforcement, funded by the massive settlement she received from the city. But she also made sure to highlight good police officers, working with reform-minded cops to build bridges between law enforcement and the communities they served. The viral video that started it all became a case study in police academies across the country. New recruits were shown the footage and asked to analyze what went wrong, how the situation could have been handled differently, and why accountability was essential to maintaining public trust. Brennan ultimately pled guilty to assault and civil rights violations. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and permanently banned from law enforcement. But his cooperation with the investigation helped expose the broader corruption, leading to meaningful reforms that protected countless future victims. On the day of his sentencing, Brennan asked to speak directly to Ronda. She agreed to meet him in the courthouse, with her attorney present. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I can't take back the pain I caused you and all those other people. But I want you to know that what happened that day, it changed me. Seeing myself through your eyes, through my daughter's eyes, it made me realize what I'd become." Ronda studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or false remorse. But what she saw was genuine brokenness, a man who'd finally understood the consequences of his actions. "I don't forgive you," she said simply. "That's not my place, and it's not what you need to hear. What you need to do is spend the rest of your life making sure this never happens to anyone else. Use your experience to help reform the system you were part of." Brennan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise I will." As Ronda left the courthouse that day, she reflected on how a single moment of standing up to a bully had sparked a movement for justice and accountability. The encounter that could have been just another case of police misconduct had instead become a catalyst for real change. The story didn't end with Brennan's sentencing. The reforms implemented in the wake of the investigation became a model for police departments nationwide. Ronda's foundation helped dozens of abuse victims seek justice, and her advocacy work led to new legislation protecting civilians' rights during police encounters. Years later, when asked about that day on Melrose Avenue, Ronda would always emphasize the same point. It wasn't about me being a fighter or a celebrity. It was about refusing to accept that someone could abuse their power without consequences. Everyone has the right to stand up to bullies, whether they wear a badge or not. The viral video remained online, a permanent reminder that accountability can come from the most unexpected places. And in police academies across the country, new recruits continued to study the case, learning that true strength comes not from intimidating others, but from serving and protecting with honor and integrity. The woman who'd once dominated opponents in the octagon had achieved her greatest victory, not through violence, but through courage, principle, and an unwavering commitment to justice. And Officer Marcus Brennan, the man who thought his badge made him untouchable, learned the hardest lesson of his life, that everyone, no matter how powerful they think they are, is accountable for their actions. This incredible journey from confrontation to justice shows us that standing up to bullies and corrupt authority figures can create real change in our world. If this story inspired you and you want to see more content about justice, accountability, and people fighting back against abuse of power, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest videos. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced police misconduct? How do you think we can continue to improve accountability in law enforcement? Your engagement and discussion help spread these important messages to even more people who need to hear them. Don't forget to smash that like button to help this story reach its maximum potential, and hit that notification bell so you're always first to see our newest content. Together, we can keep shining a light on injustice and celebrating those brave enough to stand up for what's right.